Behind every mission, every movement, and every attempt to create change, there's a human story shaping how it all unfolds. I'm Dr. Payal Beri, and this is Reframing Perspectives. This podcast is for those change makers, those purpose led founders, nonprofit leaders, growth mindset individuals, and purpose driven entrepreneurs who believe the work that they're doing in the world should actually make people's lives better. Each week, I'm sitting down with change makers who are shaping impact in their industries and communities. And together, we're going to explore the moments, the questions, and the perspective shifts that changed how they lead, how they build relationships, and how they create meaningful change in our world. Welcome to Reframing Perspectives, the podcast for change makers who believe relationships are the real infrastructure of impact. Ashley, welcome to Reframing Perspectives. This conversation, I think, is going to be so powerful because you talk about grief in such a powerful and unique perspective. And of course, with what you built with Memento and the why behind it. And before we dive into any of that, I really want to explore and just start off with the way that your daughter and with Skylar, what that was like losing her at 21 months and the process that you had to go through to recognize what it means to process grief for a life that didn't really get to live at full potential. And I think that's the grief that so many parents, so many individuals hold on to versus the grief that is held on for someone who is a grandparent that loses their life.
Yes. Thank you for having me. I am honored to be here and have this conversation with you. I would say the hardest part for me in losing my daughter is one, to your point, it is out of the natural order of things. So it's very shocking. It's very challenging to process. Not only is it hard for me to process, but then no one in our society is taught how to handle grief as well or how to support others. And so I would go into public spaces, like even my church building, and people would look at me like I had a third eyeball and run the other way. Because it would be like, oh no, it's the mom who lost her daughter and I don't know what to say or do, so I'm just going to run away. Right.
Yeah. There's like such uncomfort with
So much
I mean,
discomfort.
even as a former clinical therapist, I'm so awkward around it. I really am. I'm not the person.
We
Don't come
all
to
are.
me.
We all are. I mean,
Yeah.
like the people who aren't, I mean, they are special people in the world. So, like, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so awkward, like, join the club, right? Because, like, I even just this last weekend interacted with someone that I know who had lost a spouse. And it was a cancer that took him, sooner than we had hoped. And I mean, as a quote unquote grief specialist, that I'm like, oh gosh, like, did I say the right thing? Like, it's just hard. But what I have learned is that if we show up with love and we show up with presence, right? Like those are what I believe are the two most human things we can do. That's what matters. It's not about what you say or the actual things that you do, it's how you show up. And just to say, hey, I love you, I'm here for you, right? And I want to be here and to hold space and be a grounded, calm, loving person instead of like an anxious or fearful or like you don't need to bring that kind of chaotic energy into that space. Someone needs just a safe, grounded place to be and to hold that space in case they do need to unravel in that moment, right? So for me, when I was thinking about Skylar after she had died and just how to process that, I was lost, truly. And I was like looking to other adults, and all the adults were running other directions. And it was like, oh my gosh, like we have been dying for thousands of years, right? Like this is
Literally.
crazy. This is crazy that this is like the most guaranteed event in our life, right? And everyone's running from it and no one has any guidance. I was like, we have prototypes for flying cars. Like this is nuts. Like this is such a human experience. And why do we not have better support tools and better innovations? And like the books that I'm being given are from like the 60s and the 80s. And like, like they have some helpful things, but it wasn't incredibly helpful. And then I also, for those listening, my background, I wanted to be a doctor when I was growing up and went to Camp Biotech, went to Clemson University under biochemistry, like thought I was going to go into research and radiology and all the things. And then I learned you had to cut on dead people, like even if you didn't want to be a surgeon. And I was like, I'm out. I was like, that's it, deal breaker. I was like, I was going to push through calculus, but I am not pushing through cadaver surgeries. I switched and ended up going into graphic communications because I also had this very artistic side of me, the photography and the art and the, writing and everything that I loved on the creative side. So anyway, that was a hard, flip in college. But because of that, I love science and I love research and I still have that part of me that's very active. And so when our hospice team gave us the pamphlet on the 5 stages of grief, I was like, this something isn't right. Like there's something that's not clicking here. Let me go to the research. So I looked at Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's research and discovered that it was meant for people dying. Her
Yeah.
research was the 5 stages of death and dying. And so because it was a breakthrough research at that time and no one had really researched grief up until that point, that her research, or at least not like widely accepted, her research was taken and then misapplied to everything, right? So instead of just for people facing a terminal diagnosis, it was like, oh, you lost someone, here are the 5 stages of grief. Oh, you went through a divorce, here are the 5 stages of grief. Like it just was put everywhere, which did a huge disservice to our society because so many people feel like they're doing grief wrong because they're not going through the 5 stages. And I'm like, they were never meant for you. Like, abandon ship, like. And so when I got to that research, I was like, wow. One, it was really comforting because I was like, oh, I'm not doing grief wrong. Two, it was like, what else have we gotten wrong? Like if we've totally just taken this and misapplied it everywhere, what else are we doing that's not incredibly right? So part of me was just sitting with the photographs that we had. So Skylar was diagnosed with a terminal condition called spinal muscular atrophy at 2 months old. And she went on hospice the first time at 10 months old. And then we had a researcher step in and take over her care, which doubled her life. And so we didn't say goodbye until she was almost 21 months old.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really, really amazing. So because of that, I had a lot of anticipatory grief, and like I thought I was going to lose her at 10 months old. And then we got the second kind of chance to see her develop more of a personality. And during that time, a friend of ours had gifted us a professional portrait session. And when she died, those photos were so painful, I had to turn them all face down. Like my heart, every time I looked at them, knowing that I had just buried her, like my heart couldn't handle the dissonance of her not being alive anymore. So I just had to turn them all face down. But then like I missed her so much after just like a week or two of not seeing her face at all and, around the house or whatever. And that longing outweighed the pain. And so I turned them one by one, face back up so that I could see them around the living room and in her nursery and like all the things. So the other thing I noticed within the first year was that those photographs gave me such a safe space to grieve and really feel things, right? So I could sit with those photos and ugly cry. I could sit with those photos and tell her how much I missed her. They allowed me to really deepen the continuing bonds that I had, even after she was physically gone from my house, from my life, from my room, and gave my brain space to reckon with her being gone physically from my life. And I keep saying physically because I do believe spiritually and energetically she's still with me. But it took time to make peace with that, right? It took time for my brain to really process that. And when I look back, I was like, wow, feeling is healing. Like if we could just sit and feel and let these feelings up and ugly cry and say things that we are holding inside and all of this, like that is what is healing. And so to grieve, we have to feel, and to feel, we have to be present with whatever we're feeling. And in a society that rewards distraction and disconnection and busyness and productivity, that's really, really hard. And so for me, it was like, wow, maybe I can give this gift to other people, because at the time I had gotten into photography and was like, I can do portrait sessions for anyone facing a terminal diagnosis. Like this is an easy gift. And this was the most healing gift that I was given. And so maybe photographs are the way forward to help people when we know there's time, right? So obviously sudden accidents, aneurysms, things where it's just sudden, we don't know. But when we know we have time, we can preserve these memories and really focus on sharing that love and creating almost like that external hard drive of a photograph to help trigger your memory. Because even now, it's been 15 years that I can look back at that photograph and still almost feel her peach fuzz head or, see those bright blue eyes and stare into them when my memory is starting to fade, you know?
Hmm.
And so that photo is such a gift on so many levels. And over the last decade, it has evolved with my grief and brought me so much more joy and connection versus in the early days when it was a lot more pain, right? And so
Yeah.
as I've healed, the photos have healed and supported my journey with me, which I think
Mhm.
is so beautiful. So that's what led me to start the nonprofit and explore what other tools and how can we support one another and how do we innovate in an I don't even like calling it an industry because it's human, right? It's like, how do we innovate this very human experience to help ourselves process this better? But then also, how do we empower other people to step in and support us when we're going through hard times?
There's so many moments that you talk about in that relationship between continuing to experience that person and also what you talk about with our culture and the way that we are. So you started talking about how adults were just like run away because it's this awkward like, oh, how do we talk to this person and we don't know. And I think that speaks so much to your point of, well, two things. One is that I don't think humans can actually process death. I think that there is actually a disconnect for the brain that it doesn't fully understand and grasp like what death is. Like we understand it, we know that it happens, we know that there is like to your point, nothing else in life is guaranteed. Your health, your wealth,
Right.
your whatever, but your career, but death guaranteed,
Yeah.
exit plan is there. But we can't actually process that. And I wonder how much of that has created this awkwardness
Mhm.
of, I feel like should almost start a awkward grief club, but it's just
Can join.
that everyone can join, but because everyone also processes it so differently, because we haven't learned how to stay present with
Yeah.
it, how to stay
Yeah.
in the moment with that, I think that there's so much of understanding culturally about how we recognize and give more give more value and give more attention to the fact that these aren't things that should be dismissed. When I think about the grief that you may have for a parent loss, for a friend loss, for any kind of loss that we have in our life, and what you say so beautifully is that there's this societal conditioning of thinking about grief as in it has to change or you have to like release and you have to remove and you have to move on from. And the way that you share it is more about how does your love just transition with you?
Yes.
And I think that that
Yes.
is really an important note so
Mhm.
that it's because I think that the former of "Well, now you can release or like how do you move on from it is speaking to the cultural piece that we're talking about where it's like bury it under the rug. Like just don't deal with it. Don't talk about it, right? It's like the nice like white picket house fence. Everything's beautiful from the outside. Just don't go inside that door because it's pretty dark in there, right? So it's what you're asking of is to actually like, no, it's okay. It's okay that you're carrying the grief with you and allowing yourself and it releases shame, it releases
Yeah.
criticism, it releases a lot of that I should be doing it, I should be over it, I should be
Yes.
like all of these pieces and it's like why should you? Like this was an
Yes.
actual person that mattered in your life.
Yes, yes, so much yes. So, I have, a book that's coming out March 31st called When You Can't See the Light, and it's a trauma-informed guide to surviving a significant loss, and I literally step in and say, "I am so sorry you are going through this loss right now, and there's nothing I can say to take away your pain, like, you're gonna feel the pain, there's no shortcut to grief, but I am here to help you walk through it every day, to focus on little bite-sized pieces to help you support your body, to help support your mind, to help support your heart. And we go through different things to focus on each day. You can come back, you can move through the book as you wish. And one of the sub chapters in there is surrendering the shoulds, right? And releasing expectation and stop shoulding on yourself. Because it's like you can easily bury yourself in shoulds of I should have done this or I should have done that. I should have said this or I shouldn't be picking out his casket right now or like whatever it is, even in the negative, right? That I shouldn't be here alone. Or it's like that is such a disconnect from your reality that you can't actually be present when you're shitting on yourself because you're trying to force yourself into a different reality. And so I always joke around that I feel like I have been sent to this earth to be the PR person for grief, 'cause so many people are like, "Grief is so awful, it's the worst feeling in the world, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, grief is actually the healing process. Like, grieving is healing, right? So it's not this bad guy that we need to, like, shove in the back closet or, like, lock out of our house, is here to help us. What sucks is the loss. What sucks is this separation, right? That we are no longer together with something that we loved, whether it's,
Physically.
yeah, physically or even a dream, right? The hope of a relationship. Like, it can be so many different things that cause grief. But when we have that separation, we're focusing on the lack, right? Like, I don't have this person anymore. This sucks, right? And this is where, you brought up about this idea of love transforming. I truly believe that love is never lost, it's just transformed. And so when a person dies, their love, their energy doesn't just disappear. And what's really cool is the way that I've thought about it with my daughter is I used to feel really, really sad, like, for the first bunch of years after she died, like, even on her birthday especially. I would just be so depressed and lay in bed all day and just eat a whole pan of brownies by myself. It's just like, whatever I can do to just, like, make this
Comfort.
day go by faster. Yeah, comfort and just like, can we please just wake up tomorrow? But in the low, I realized I was focusing on, she's not here. I don't have anything to celebrate. We don't have milestones or life or anything that's, like, happening next to be happy about. And so that's why I'm so sad, right? But if I can refocus on, she's still able to love me from the realm wherever she is right now. And I'm still loving her. Like, my love didn't go anywhere either. But what happened was Skylar was a finite being, right? She had skin, she had edges, she had boundaries. When she died, all of that went away. And I hate the phrase grief is love with nowhere to go, because as poetic as it sounds, it's simply not true, right? Because I can choose where that love goes now. Yes, the body is gone. I don't have Skylar to direct that love to as a person, but now my love is boundless, right? I have all this unconditional love that I can direct wherever I want it to go.
Hmm.
And so I've redirected it into building the nonprofit and redirected it into all the families that we've served. And I've redirected it into my book, and I've redirected all of this pure unconditional love into showing up for the world, right? And still being a mother, but mothering other things. And so for those who don't know, Skylar was my only child and her condition was genetic. And so the secondary loss that we experienced was we weren't going to have any more kids because of the genetic component.
Right.
So it was like, wow, that just, and I had her so young, my husband and I were surprised as young parents with a pregnancy. It was kind of one of those, like, oops, I guess we'll be young parents. And so then it was like, she was born when I was 25 and then died when I was 27.
Wow.
And so it was like this, yeah, this experience of, hey, at 27, my family's done, right? I can adopt if I choose to in the future, but, like, biologically, like, we're done. So those losses definitely compound and are things to process, but it was still this freeing realization that all of my love for my daughter was still there, and now it could be redirected and repurposed elsewhere. And it would still go to her, right? But it just didn't have the bounds of just for her anymore. And so one of the things I tell people a lot too is this love is an energy that's exchanged. And so ask your loved one for signs, ask for them to show up, ask for them to feel their presence. Like, there's still this active component, even though they're not physically here. And sometimes when you're feeling sad about missing them, that might actually be them trying to just, like, be with you. And you're feeling sad because you recognize their presence, but you're recognizing it as they're no longer here when really they're here spiritually and you just don't recognize it, right?
Yeah.
So there's a beautiful spiritual component that is still a mystery, right,
Hmm.
of death. And I think that's part of why our brains can't process it, because we're like, where do they go? How come I still feel them? But they're not here. Like, I can't make sense of it all,
Right.
right? So I do think there's this beautiful spiritual mystery. I do think there's this beautiful spiritual mystery part of it that is also an energetic and love-based exchange that is, I'm still exploring and learning about that is really powerful.
That part of that Skylar was a physical being that had boundaries, had shape, had skin, but her essence of what she represented has lived on through the nonprofit, through and I see that as almost where your defining moment of your purpose and Skylar coming into your life were clearly so tied together and how that then ultimately you've had the courage to manifest that for the way that you show up then for other communities and family members and helping them reshape their relationship to love and grief. And I think that what you said is so powerful of to in your 20s to have to go from, "Oh my god, we're having a family so early and we're gonna be young parents," to, "We're losing our only child and now we're not gonna have kids, biological kids,"
Mhm.
within 2 years.
Mhm.
Well, 3 years total, right? Like,
Right. Mhm.
pregnancy to
Mhm.
loss. And so in 3 years, your entire life is completely flipped upside down.
Yes.
And that happens where it's for so many people and we can manifest it in different ways because of our coping strategies. It's either you're going to then say, "Okay, what does this look like for me to then move with this?"
Mhm.
Or, it's carrying the anger of
Mhm.
it and then how that ends up manifesting in different ways as well.
Mhm.
Resentment, bitterness. You end up isolating yourself from society, from community that could really be there for you. And what I find really powerful in what you're talking about is that if we can reshape that relationship and recognize that your loss may be of the physical part of it,
Yep.
but if you hold on to the spirit of that, and I think of this where, when I lost my maternal grandmother, she was such a force to be reckoned with and such a powerful, beautiful presence in our family that was truly the matriarch, has gone through so much. Like the humor was amazing, everything. And I felt really, really connected to her. We had the same
Mm.
birthday,
Mm.
60
Mhm.
years apart. So, of course,
Um,
I was convinced
yes.
myself that out of the 17 grandkids, I'm her favorite.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But I named my company after her. The
Mm.
RK are her initials. And one question I like to ask others is what is the legacy that you hope to keep alive
Mhm.
through that? And what my intention for that is we're not necessarily focusing on this like, oh, we're going to have the statue of this person. We're going to have a hospital wing named after this person, but it's more about what you're talking about is how are you going to have the impact in your community around it? How are you going to carry the essence of that person through this? And so whether they were a 21-month-old child or a 91-year-old grandparent, they carry a spark
Mhm.
and they carry an essence, and that's what you remember, that's what you miss. And so when you're able to pass that on, I think that's such a beautiful way of helping to reshape our relationship to grief. And I think right now as well, when we look at society and the way that it's just so broken, there's layers of grief that is continuously happening on a
Yeah.
daily basis. Like
So much.
grief of communities just not getting along, of human to human just being able to not see ourselves for the compassion that we all hold for, within ourselves, the defeat that we feel.
Yeah.
And so what you're talking about is even I can imagine this within a family, the grief of, when a family stops talking to each other and,
Yeah.
you know, relationships break or the grief of thinking and idealizing a type of life that you were hoping to have and then having
Mhm.
to come to terms with that's not gonna be the life that you have.
Yeah.
What you're creating is really about helping that person find peace with it all.
Mhm. Yeah, and, it's interesting, the nonprofit went through a rebrand a few years ago, and one of his ideas was this idea of the phrase "making peace with grief," It's like, how do you again, it's like we're taught to avoid it, to run from it, to numb out, to dissociate, how do we make peace with it? And part of what I talk about whenever I have the opportunity is this idea of what healing is, because a lot of times people assume wrongly that healing is trying to get back to who you were before the loss. And that's not possible, right? Especially if it's a significant loss, like you're forever changed. Like I am never gonna be the person I was before Skylar, nor would I want to be, honestly, but that's a different story. But healing is really about embracing that pain and embracing the discomfort and saying, "I'm wounded," right? And I feel this hurt. Like, this hurts, and acknowledging it and saying, "Wow, like, instead of running from this, I'm gonna sit with this. I'm gonna understand why I'm feeling it. And then I'm gonna learn how to integrate it into my being so that I can be whole again." Because a lot of times losses, whether it's a traumatic loss or a job loss or a house loss or a death or whatever it is, if we run from it or if we don't fully feel it, it can cause a disconnection inside of us and it can cause us to become fragmented. And a lot of people have unresolved grief and trauma from childhood, right? Like, go way back. And people can tell you, like it was yesterday, about a time where they were wounded. And oftentimes I find that those people haven't fully sat with it because at the time, maybe they didn't have the tools, they didn't have the support, they didn't have their current self to be able to go back and say, wow, that was really wrong. I'm so sorry that happened to you. And like sit with it and feel it and process it. But now as an adult, you do have that ability, right? And so this idea of integration is like going back into those places and staying present with that pain and saying that was wrong and that was a hurt that you need to feel, and now we're going to reconnect with that place. Maybe it's your 5-year-old self or your 14-year-old self or your 27-year-old self, right? That it's like we're going to reconnect that place where now that's no longer a fragment that we're trying to shove out of our life. We're going to embrace it and be whole in all of the versions of ourself and have what you talk about so beautifully is like this compassion for yourself, the empathy for others to say, you know what? I was so little when that happened. I didn't know any better. I didn't know how to process. I didn't know what regulation of my nervous system was. I didn't know all these things. And then this empathy for others, like maybe it was a parent where you're like, man, they were working 2 jobs. They were stressed. You have all this empathy for others where it doesn't excuse their behavior. But as an adult now, you can understand maybe why it happened, right?
Right.
And then you say, okay, so I had this loss or this traumatic experience or whatever. And so I have compassion for myself, the empathy for others. And then you go in and you say, okay, so instead of running from this or making up stories that aren't true, I'm going to sit with this and understand what it was. And then it's my responsibility to heal and to integrate this into loving this part of myself because I need to love my whole self.
Hmm.
And so, how do we love our whole self when we're ignoring and running from pieces of our past self? And so, it's really this idea of integration of healing is becoming whole again, not trying to return to who we were in our past selves or trying to get to some future self that doesn't exist yet, but just integrating into the wholeness of who we are in this very moment.
Wow. First of all, I love how you just tied my framework into the work that you do. That's so amazing. And second is, I think you touched on something really important is if we even think about as a society, right? COVID happened 2020, literally 6 years ago now, which is wild. And I genuinely believe that in these 6 years and why things have felt so heavy is because I think people are trying to, there's a cognitive dissonance of this world that existed pre-COVID
Hmm.
and what we were like
Hmm.
and all the things that have happened since
Yeah.
we in a way it was a traumatic
Hmm.
episode that occurred in global like world
Yes.
community
Yes.
society. We didn't have a say in it. We didn't have any authority around it. We were helpless to some account, and then the world just completely flipped, and now we have to operate in this world that just feels so foreign. We
Hmm.
haven't collectively had an opportunity to grieve what happened in this transition. Yet AI is here. So we're moving at the speed of light in other ways. And we're like, wait a second, we haven't even figured out how to be with each other in this moment because we're
Correct.
also during COVID and during everything that happened, there was like ripples of strains that came up because now everyone was grounded. That's what I like to say. It's COVID is like God or universe or whatever you believe grounded us as humans. And we went how we had to go indoors for like
Yes.
9 months while the world
Totally.
thrived again. Earth
Yes.
thrived. I always say this is my ADD moment tangent. Earth will be fine. Animals
Yeah.
will be fine. Everything will be fine. Humans will be extinct because we'll do this to
Absolutely.
ourselves.
Yes.
But that moment was, God or universe grounding us and sending us to our rooms to show us the 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 savage craziness that we create in this world.
Yes.
And part of that being this like inability to see ourselves.
Mhm.
And I think there's a loss of what we have experienced societally or
Yeah.
societally. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's a
I
word,
I know, yes,
but
for sure.
whatever.
I'm
You
plugging
got
you.
it. But whatever, this grief that we are experiencing together as a society and our unwillingness to or unknowingly how to process that while still just trying to it's draining.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so this is where, I fully agree with you that COVID was this forced timeout, right?
Mhm.
Of okay, let's pause. It was a giant pause button, it felt like. Obviously, with a lot of trauma and grief, as you mentioned, for all the reasons that you said. And then obviously, we were losing people at alarming rates. And then the trauma of, medical staffers not knowing what was happening, potentially risking their lives, so much job loss, like all the domino effects of loss. So there's so much that happened. And unfortunately, we, at least in America, because I can't speak to the other experiences around the world of their leaders and how they led their countries and stuff like that. But we did not have mindful leaders who were able to walk us through mindfully with a peaceful, calm presence in a way that honored the fear and the panic and the trauma and the emotions that we were all experiencing. And I think part of that is obviously we live in a capitalistic world, which I'm not saying is bad, it just has consequences where productivity and profits are the priority.
Right.
I think the other piece that is so hard is grief begs us to slow down.
Mhm.
COVID was a time of grief for sure. Like we were grieving so much, whether you recognized it or not, it was grief. um, and grief begs us to slow down and reprioritize and really take account of what we have in our lives that's working and what's not working. And I think if anything good could come from COVID, that was it, right? That we had time to reevaluate. And so many people were like, yeah, we're not going in the office. We're wasting time commuting when we could be home with our families, right? Like, we're not going back to all this work travel because we don't have to. Like, we managed fine over Zoom, right? And so
Right.
there are like all these good things that came of it, of like reevaluating and reprioritizing time and like connection. And I'm going to spend it with my family. Or, some families were like, oh no, we need to travel and be apart.
Yeah.
But, like, there were just so many opportunities for reevaluation. I think the struggle, which you mentioned, is no one helped us process the grief and the compounding grief that we experienced, let alone to be forced into a return in lots of different ways and having trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma to this day, like daily traumas now. It's not just like a COVID happened and it was like a one-time trauma. It's like
Right.
COVID happened, and then the war in Ukraine happened, and then it's like there are bombings in, Syria, there are bombings in Palestine, there are bombings in like there's so many
Yeah.
like news, like truly traumatic news footage hitting us every single day. Then we
Which we're
have
not
school
meant to
shootings.
have
Right.
this.
Then we have school shootings, then we have like, random news that they have to fearmonger you because that's how they get clicks. And that's again the profit and the capitalistic side of it, right? And that's also how social media works. The more angry and upset and fearful they can make you, the more you're engaged. And
Right.
so if we can start to understand that the government and companies profit over our mental unwellness, right? Like, how messed up is that?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, how do we as individuals learn for ourselves to step outside of the noise and the chaos and say, it's important for me to know what's going on, but I'm not going to let myself be consumed by it? And this is a struggle for me every day. I'm not saying I have it figured out.
Well, but I think it's calling it, right? It's the first step is calling it, and I think that there's that the friction is the individuals that we collectively went through this, and then there's the individuals that are so resistant to processing because their emotional capacity to actually process grief is so fragile that if they do, it's actually going to break them even further. So for them, their response is, "No, we gotta return back to what it was
Yes.
before, but that previous thing doesn't exist, and now you're living in this, like, Alice in Wonderland maze, right, where
Yeah,
you're trying to find your way back, but that back doesn't exist anymore." And
totally.
so then, to have to come to terms in reality with the world that you wanna live in doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
It's really hard and painful, and then having to but you're not ready to accept this new world either, and I honestly, I genuinely have a lot of compassion for the elderly, and
Mm,
you think about,
yeah.
the seniors who have gone through so many different if you think about boomers, ho they've gone through so many different technological advances, things like
Yes.
that, right? And it's like they and then your cognitive slows down when you're older, and so then to
Mhm.
have to keep up, it's a really scary world when you're older, and I understand why they wanna hold on so deeply, and then we have those same boomers controlling our world. They're our leaders, right?
Yeah. Well, and so many are willing to let go because 'cause they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna be dead soon." So it's
Exactly,
like,
exactly.
what I don't have to face the consequences anymore.
Right, and
And
they're
I think
not future forward thinking about
mhm.
what the next generation has to hold and the weight that they're carrying into.
Well, and I feel like too, there's this world where so many boomers and I say boomers lovingly because it's my parents, right? But it's
Right.
like they had to grow up in a world where they were told not to feel things, right? Those trends that became popular on Instagram where they're talking about like breaking the generational cycles and
Mhm.
millennials will be, like, talking to their kids, and they're like, "Kids are to be listened to," or I
Yeah.
forget what the phrase was now, but it's like, "Kids should be seen and not blank,"
Hurt.
right? And now millennials kids are like, "I don't know, what's the word, mommy?" You know? But, like, boomers generations are like, "Oh, yeah, heard, like, done. Like, we do not feel things, we do not talk, we do not talk back, we're here to play outside and disappear and come in for dinner." And so they grew up in a really harsh, I think, culture where their parents were of the depression, right?
Mhm.
And so again, when you look at empathy with kind of the world that they grew up in, I think it's really hard because they're trying to learn now as older people to we had all this childhood trauma, like all this abuse that was not called abuse, it was just how you grew up, right? Like even
Right.
my mom is like, "I wasn't abused," and I'm like, pretty sure you were." Like,
They were gaslit into
yeah,
believing,
totally.
and it's
Right.
so true, and they're not, and to say, "Well, I'm too old now, I don't care, this is what it
Right.
is."
And so it's like, how do we, support them in all of their unresolved grief and trauma so that they can heal? Because I genuinely believe we're all connected, right? And so
Absolutely.
if we can help any person, let alone a whole generation, but any person to go back into that unresolved grief and trauma and process it, right? And heal a part of themselves, they're going to show up in the world very differently.
100%.
And I think that's part of, like, so many of the problems that we're facing in our world today. It's like, gosh, I really believe the root of it is unresolved grief and trauma. And so if we can get into those places instead of people showing up with fear and trepidation and anger and hurt and bitterness and, some of the stuff we talked about earlier, it's like if people could heal those wounds and learn to trust and love again, right? You're gonna show up very, very differently than if you stay disconnected and fragmented and traumatized. And so that's something that I'm really, really hoping my work and your work can help do is like bring in the empathy and understanding of like, hey, like this maybe wasn't your fault, right? But now you can heal it and you have the authority and the control and the accountability, responsibility to heal it. And so, how do we make our world a better place? We heal ourselves, right? And then we can show up differently and hold space for others to do the same. And then have this like beautiful ripple effect of showing up in love for everybody to re meet their past wounded selves.
Yeah, I think the work that you're doing with your organization and how you're helping these families reposition that, I always just think about this as like, one of the most powerful things is a change maker and someone who is making impact even in that one family's life, that second family's life, is that by you helping to shift that person's perspective, now they have the tools to help someone in their community who's going to ultimately experience that too. Because as you said, death is guaranteed,
Right.
grief
Right.
is guaranteed.
Yes.
So by shifting and reframing that for that family, for that individual, it's allowing them to then ripple that into the community. And so this is work of patience. This is work of compassion. This is work of truly being present and recognizing and building tolerance for it, which is also very hard to do in a world that is about instant gratification.
Yeah. And when you're hurting too, I wanna make a note here for people who are listening too, because, when you're hurting, you do not have the margin to hold space for others, right? And so that's the really hard part too, is because with COVID, we were all hurting, right? And so it was like, and I think that's why we see this rise of violence and hatred and ugliness in the world is like, it was always there, I think, personally, but now there's no margin for it. So it's just coming out, right? Like there's just like everyone's hurting, so there's no margin to create space for yourself to hold space for other people's pain. And so now we're just
Absolutely.
like pain, 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 like overflowing out of everybody. And so really the transformation happens when you can create margin for yourself through meditation, prayer, whatever it is to regulate your nervous system, create a calm, grounded place, lower the stress, and then hold space so that when someone else explodes in pain, you don't give pain back to them, right?
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's what's happening in the world right now is like someone comes out in pain and then someone else is like, well, your pain, I have pain. And then I have this pain. And then it's like a pain competition.
It's ping ponging back.
Yeah, and so it's like, how do we interrupt that cycle? And it's by creating a barrier where it's like, "Hey, your pain's gonna hit me, but I can transmute it because I have the space to hold it and then let it go," right? And so I'm not gonna take your pain and then make more pain and give it back to you. And so the more of us who can heal, and if you need a therapist, go to therapy, whatever it is to support your journey in healing, meditation, journaling, walking in the woods, there's so many healing tools that are at our disposal right now that you can create space in your life so that when someone yells at you, your reaction isn't to pull out the claws and attack them back, right? You can instead say, "Hey, that seems like a really intense reaction. Are you okay?" Right? What's going on in your life that's making you yell at me right now? Because this isn't a normal interaction for what just happened, right? Or whatever it is that you can stop and say, "Hey, I see that you're hurting. What's going on? And how can I support you so that you're not hurting anymore?" And then I think if we could all do that and meet pain with love, that we could transform the hurt to healing.
That's so beautiful and that's so necessary. And I think this is something that, regardless of where you are in your life, what you are doing, and I really, really, really believe change makers are the first ones to distract their own selves in their grief because they're so busy helping others process theirs, that ultimately it will find you and it will create that, and how that's going to then ultimately impact the work that you're doing anyway. So I think every individual needs to find that way of being able to open themselves up to receiving support as much as they want to be in that place to give. And I think what you're mentioning is so powerful and important, is that in order to also give and have empathy, and I say this too in my framework, is that in order to truly have empathy for others and not make it about yourself, you need to first know how to process things for yourself, which is that compassion piece.
Yes.
And so, last question for you is, in this journey of your grief that you had with losing Skylar, with then transitioning that and manifesting that into starting this organization, helping other families and other individuals with the photography that you do and with Memento, what have you learned in this process for yourself now after helping so many people process their grief in a way that wasn't there and available for you at your time?
That's a great question. And I would add on to that that the most common question that I get is, how do you do this work? Right?
Mhm.
And how do you do this and not get triggered? Or how do you um yeah, how do you do this and carry the weight of the grief? And I think the biggest thing is, I would say, starting out, helping was a form of survival. I was in so much pain that I was like, I just need to find something to do, right? Something that feels good because I'm not able to get out of bed, right? When Skylar died, like the first, I would say, several months, I just wanted to lay in bed and rot and never wake up again. It was that bad. It was just like I would lay face down on the pillow hoping I wouldn't wake up. It was just like make this nightmare end. I had a dog who refused to pee on the floor and made me get him up, made me get up so I would take him outside. Skylar died in August, and so there was sunshine, there was warm air, and so I would open the door to let him out and feel life again, you know? And through that transition, um, I started photographing people. I started anytime I heard of anyone facing a terminal diagnosis, I would volunteer a session. This was before the nonprofit was a thing. So I'd volunteer a session and was just like, how can I help others? Because this was such a nightmare for me that I don't want other people to go through it. Or if they have to, that they would have tools and be in a better place than when I went through it. And ultimately, what I learned in supporting so many families was that love is such a powerful force, like in all the ways that you can possibly imagine. So it's a powerful force in how you show up for yourself, like to have self love and truly love yourself. It's a powerful force in showing up to love other people. And like I said, really showing up in love and not fear. People showed up for us in love, and it made all the difference. Like, even when I would say like 80% of our community disappeared, right? We had friends just never talk to us again. We had, truly like people running in other directions. We had so many people disappear, but we had a handful of people who showed up regularly and consistently with love. We had complete strangers show up with love that made such a difference. And when you show up for each other in love too, whether it's in the photographs or just how you spend your time together, like, those are the memories that stick with you, right? Love lasts. And so we can't take clothes, we can't take money, we can't take our investments, we can't take anything with us. But the love is what's left when you die. And the love is what people remember. And so when we talk about legacy, like, I want to focus on all the love that I can give to the world, right? I want to focus on how do I empty myself out, not in an unhealthy way where I'm giving from the fumes, which is what I did when I first started the nonprofit, but learning boundaries, learning rest, learning how to support myself so that I can show up and love others with that unconditional, beautiful love of true support and change. And so, and really that transformation. So I think, yeah, after serving so many families and being invited into those vulnerable moments, it really is the love that makes the difference, and choosing to be courageous and brave to stay present in those really, really hard moments and still show up in love makes all the difference.
Ashley, thank you so much for being here, for being on Reframing Perspectives, and for the work that you're doing around grief and just really transitioning and transforming the relationship and understanding of it through your experience, through the experience of these families that you're giving. I couldn't agree more that love is one of the most emotionally overwhelming and beautiful feelings, that if there's any feeling that I want to overwhelm myself with, it is that. And I think that clearly Skylar was a gift to you because she was ultimately the vessel that created this entire movement that you've built.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing this and for everything that you're doing. And we'll definitely have all the links below for people to engage with you, to get your book when it comes out, and just being able to receive that support. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This is great.
Hi, friends. I have a favor to ask you. If you're finding meaning and you're really resonating with these episodes, I'd love if you could subscribe, leave a review, or share it with your friends and family. Your words help others discover the stories and perspectives that we're exploring over here. And the more that we grow and the more feedback that we get from you through these reviews, the more we can make sure to create meaningful episodes that you're going to enjoy. So subscribe, follow, leave a review, and share it with your family and friends. Thank you so much.